What the hell is going on? You didn't make lunch today. Over the phone, my husband abruptly yelled at me. He seemed irritated that I hadn't made his lunch and that I had been away from home. I told him to look after himself while I was gone, but he said, "Look, you're a housewife, right? Why you're skipping? You're a housewife who skips duties?" My husband didn't seem convinced. What a small man he is to make such a big deal about not having lunch for one day. I was fed up with him doing all of the housework and then taking it out on me when things didn't go his way. My mother-in-law had a faint smile on her face as she stood beside me, listening to my husband's yelling over the phone. "My name is Emily. I live with my husband and 2 children. Seth and Ray are twin boys who are 2 years old. I am so happy as the mother of twins who are so adorable. Raising these children is unquestionably the source of my current happiness. Nicholas, my husband, is a typical businessman. My husband's family owns a Japanese-style confectionery store in a shopping arcade corner. I quit my job shortly after my marriage, and I'm now assisting my in-laws with their store. With a light heart, I began working at the shop. But the work at the confectionery was much busier than I had anticipated. I not only serve customers in the store with its colorful selection of wagashi, but I also make my own sweets in the back kitchen. I have to be in the kitchen from early morning to prepare the sweets on time during the busiest times of the year. I continue to assist after the birth of my twins. I would sometimes stand in the store with my children on my back. Their cries would sometimes carry into the store, even when I was babysitting them away from the store. While caring for the young children, I continued to work at the store. My husband, on the other hand, was unconcerned about the wagashiya. "Hey, do you still have no plans to take over the confectionery business?" I asked. We've discussed it several times, but my husband appears to have no intention of taking over the confectionery business. "I've told you numerous times. I'm not going to take over the store. Isn't wagashiya so lame these days? The number of people in the shopping arcade is decreasing year by year. And if I take over the confectionery business now, I will have no future." My husband has no desire to take over the wagashiya of his family. Of course, he can't take over the store right now because he works for a larger corporation. But I like my in-law's store and don't want to see it go away. "Are you going to the pachinko again today, Nicholas?" "Sure. Of course I am. Is it harmful? What I do on my day off is entirely up to me." On holidays, my husband always goes out to play pachinko. He even gets in line to play pachinko as soon as it opens. Despite this, he ignores the housework. I did all of the cooking, cleaning, and laundry, as well as the housework. Moreover, the most important aspect of child rearing was completely left to me. My husband spent the time at his own pace while I was busy with housework, childcare, and the confectionery shop. My in-laws are getting older, and my workload at the confectionery shop is increasing. My in-laws, particularly my mother-in-law, were extremely understanding of my situation. "Emily, you help us with the store, and we are very grateful. Thank you so much for everything." This was how my mother-in-law always expressed her gratitude. She's a lovely lady who has nothing to do with the wife-mother-in-law situation. Her gentle and kind smile warmed my heart. "I really need Nicholas's assistance," she explained. "He no longer appears to be interested in the confectionery." My mother-in-law always looked sad when we talked about my husband. I suppose she really wants him to take over the company. But her husband refused to agree. "Well, we're lucky to have such a wonderful wife, Emily. We should stop being greedy." My mother-in-law lavishes praise on me. She also values my assistance at the store while raising my children. When I'm at the store, she babysits the kids with my father-in-law, which is a big help. And my mother-in-law has become my go-to person with whom I can talk about anything. Of course, she listens to my complaints of my husband. Ironically, the more distance I feel from my husband, the stronger my bond with my mother-in-law grows. The presence of my in-laws was very reassuring to me right now. With such a life, the days fly by in a blur. Raising 2 children means that each day flies by with no time to think about anything else. It's almost the end of the year, and the wagashiya is getting busy. It coincides with the end-of-year gift-giving season, and we are in transition. After consulting with my in-laws, I decided to stay at home this year and focus on wagashi preparation. I informed my husband of this. What? Are you taking the kids and staying at my parents' house? My husband was clearly upset. I explained to him that I would only be staying for one night to assist on a busy day. How about the housework? The response was as expected. It is a more serious problem for my husband, who does not do any housework at all. If I do not do housework for even one day, he gets upset, even if it's the busy season for the confectionery. This time, I'll only be away for one night. So can't you be cooperative during that time? It's only a single day, so everything should be fine, right? If you get hungry, you prepare some meals. There will be no laundry to do if it is only for one day. I told my husband that there was nothing to be concerned about, but he continued to complain. You know what? You're still a housewife, aren't you? I tell you this again. I'm the family's breadwinner. Who do you believe is in charge of feeding our 2 children? My husband began to grumble. I didn't want to talk to him any longer. I didn't say anything else, and I took the kids to my in-laws' house without my husband's permission. I had a lot of work waiting for me when I arrived at my parents' house. It was the end of the year, and business was brisk at the wagashiya. Orders for year-end gifts were pouring in faster than usual, and my decision to stay and assist was not wrong. The creation of gift items begins with the assembly of empty boxes. This is a surprisingly difficult job, especially at the end of the year when hundreds of boxes must be made for year-end gifts. My in-laws and I divided up the box-making duties. After the first day at my in-laws' house, I was exhausted, but the next day I had to work hard from early in the morning to make wagashi. To prepare for the next day, I decided to go to bed early, and by the time dawn arrived, I had already started working. While the kids were still sleeping, my in-laws and I stayed in the kitchen and worked quietly on the wagashi. The sun had risen before I knew it, and the morning of December had arrived. With the fresh air and morning sun, we decided to take a break and eat breakfast. The kids were already awake and ready for breakfast. I hurriedly prepared breakfast for them and served it at the table, and they came running up to me smiling. My in-laws, sons, and I were all seated around the table. My phone rang right then and there. It was my husband who called. What the heck is going on? You didn't make lunch today. My husband yelled at me as soon as I picked up the phone. He seemed irritated that there was no lunchbox, which was supposed to be available at all times. I told him to make his own lunch while I was gone, but had he forgotten? What do you mean, avoiding housework? When I told my husband that he should prepare the food himself, he seemed unconvinced. He accuses me of laziness. What a prick he is to make such a big deal about not having lunch only for one day. He leaves everything up to me, and when things don't go his way, he transforms into this. I was shocked, and my in-laws appeared to be as well, because they could clearly hear my husband yelling over the phone. Finally, my husband rambled on about what he wanted to say before abruptly hanging up the phone. Even though breakfast has just been served, the living room of my in-laws' house was quiet for a while. My husband lost his cool in an unreasonable way, so it was as expected. The kids seemed to sense the atmosphere and refused to eat their breakfast. My mother-in-law cheerfully said "itadakimasu" and urged my sons to eat their breakfast as well, as if to draw out the atmosphere. She then turned to face me and said, "Why don't you divorce my son, Emily?" My movement comes to a halt as I reach for my tea. I never expected my mother-in-law to say something like that to me. My father-in-law was eating his breakfast quietly, with an indescribable expression on his face. I believe I was a little out of line, but now that you've been told something like that, I believe you've come to your senses. As she spoke to me, my mother-in-law smiled. It seems that when a person is truly disgusted, there is no choice but to laugh. I feel terrible for you as a mother. You are no longer required to be merciful to my son. Allow your emotions to guide you. My mother-in-law had probably figured out how I felt about him by now. My mother-in-law was on my side. My mother-in-law is always supportive and encouraging. My father-in-law never speaks, but he nods in agreement to my mother-in-law's words. The presence of my in-laws was reassuring to me, and it was on this day that I returned home. I waited for my husband's return with my mind made up. My husband returned home later in the evening. He had a tense expression on his face, as if he was still upset that I hadn't prepared his lunch. I asked him to take a seat because I needed to speak with him. I motioned for him to take a seat. "What do you want to talk about?" He cocked his brow and looked at me. I told him to sit down again, ignoring his mood. I held out the divorce papers when he sat down grimly. "I'm going to divorce you." The words divorce slipped out of my mouth. My husband's grumpy expression abruptly changed to one of surprise. "Why did you say divorce so abruptly? Are you kidding me? The kids are still so young." My husband was in a panic, not understanding why I was seeking a divorce. He's adamant that he does not want a divorce. In addition, there is no reason for me to divorce in the first place. So he tried to avoid the discussion by claiming it was invalid. "There's a reason." I stopped him from fleeing. Then I pulled a few photos from an envelope on the table. There was a photo of my husband walking with a woman holding hands. "Didn't you say you go to pachinko on your days off? What exactly is this? You appear to be having a good time." When he saw the photo, my husband's face turned pale. I pressed him to tell me what was going on. "No, this is, well, listen to me." He was making up some nonsense excuse about how she was just an acquaintance. "She's a junior employee at your company, isn't she?" My husband's movement ceased when I mentioned the identity of the woman in the photograph. My husband had an affair with a younger woman who worked at the same company as him. I had been suspicious of his behavior and had discussed it with my mother-in-law for some time. My mother-in-law suggested I hire a detective to investigate an affair. The findings of the subsequent investigation astounded me. My husband had entered a pachinko parlor with a woman and then gone directly to her room. "I have more photos. You two are very close, so the investigator could take many photos. Would you like to see more?" When confronted with undeniable evidence, the husband finally confessed. He readily admitted that he was a pachinko fan, that he had a romantic relationship with this woman. and that he had been visiting her room during the day. "I'm sorry, Emily. I was just experimenting with fire. I'm sorry for my kids. I'm leaving this girl right now, so please don't divorce me." My husband, who was no longer at my mercy, apologized emphatically. However, I will never forgive him. I'm dead set on getting a divorce. I'm not joking. I've been assisting at your parents' home. While babysitting, I have taken care of things that you do not want me to do. I've informed your father and mother about this. My in-laws, I told my husband, were on my side, not his. They have both stated that they will assist me in any way they can. We work together, so there was plenty of time to talk. They explained. They were both furious at you. Of course, I informed them that we were divorcing. My husband completely lost his cool. He broke down in tears. "Please, I would never do a thing like this." My caution appeared to have completely overwhelmed him. He just kept muttering that he didn't want a divorce after that. "I can't do it with you any longer. I will make certain that you pay alimony and child support." I noticed him of a divorce. My husband begged for more forgiveness on his knees, but I refused to listen to him. As a result, my husband and I divorced. I insisted on alimony payments from both my husband and the woman with whom he had an affair. My husband had to pay child support for our children as well. My husband then chose to resign from his job with a woman who had lost her position in the company after the company discovered their affair. My in-laws were furious and informed my husband that he would be cut off from his family and barred from the family home. My husband, who has no one to rely on, is now compelled to work from morning to night, doing manual labor in order to pay his monthly bills. After the divorce, I continue to work at the wagashia. My in-laws asked me to continue. I enjoy working in the store, and of course, I need to support my children. My in-laws want me to run the store after they retire. They intend to eventually give me the store and their home. Naturally, I intend to take over. In the future, I will be the confectionery's proprietress. I will continue to work hard at my job and raise my children while looking ahead.
Stop acting all high and mighty just because you're pregnant. It's annoying that you can't even manage the housework.
My husband's attitude changed the moment I got pregnant. Before I got pregnant, Kevin was a cheerful and lively guy who constantly lifted my spirits. However, with the help of parents-in-law, I thought my husband's behavior had improved. Turns out, that was just wishful thinking on my part. My name is Amy. Kevin and I are both working, juggling household chores and jobs to make ends meet. He's a bit rough around the edges, but always upbeat and happy. Even when I'm down, he always finds a way to make me laugh. Sure, he sometimes likes a read on social cues, but that's what I find endearing about him. Thanks to that, despite being busy with work and chores, I've been able to enjoy my days. One day, after several years of such a marriage, a welcome change came for both of us as a couple. I got pregnant, and our family grew. We were thrilled when we found out and immediately went to share the news with our parents-in-law. They were delighted, especially my mother-in-law, Emily, who was eager for a grandchild.
Amy, thank you so much. If you need any help or run into any issues, just say the word. We're here to support you,
Emily told me. It was a welcome offer, given that I was feeling a mix of happiness and some anxieties. Even my usually reserved father-in-law, George, promised to help, although he seemed a bit restless. While my parents-in-law and I were excited about the new addition to the family, Kevin was noticeably out of sorts ever since he learned about my pregnancy. When I told him, his reaction was flat.
"Oh, you're pregnant. All right, got it."
It was an unexpectedly bland response from a man who's usually so cheerful and upbeat. He seemed reluctantly present during the announcement to my parents-in-law and hardly participated in the conversation. I chalked up his odd behavior to the sudden realization that he was going to be a father and was probably nervous about it. Moreover, I was so thrilled about being pregnant that I didn't pay much attention to his reaction. Even my mother-in-law, noticing his demeanor, said, "Isn't this your child too? Shouldn't you be happier?" But even she didn't seem too concerned. I believed that our excitement about having a child was the most important thing and that Kevin's behavior was temporary. However, as the months rolled by, his attitude didn't improve. In fact, it became far worse than before my pregnancy. I've continued working after getting pregnant, but I tire more easily now. Sometimes I struggle with housework when I get home, which prompts comments from Kevin like,
"What about dinner? It's not ready yet?" Just because you're pregnant doesn't mean you can slack off on housework. You're really useless.
if I fail to have dinner ready when he comes home, I get an earful.
So what if you're pregnant? You still have to do your job and the housework. It's terrible that you're using pregnancy as an excuse to slack off.
Sometimes morning sickness is so bad that I have to skip work and chores. Yet my husband doesn't help around the house at all. This wasn't an issue before my pregnancy. Recently, though, it's rare for a day to pass without a complaint from him. The happiness and cheerfulness I used to feel have vanished. Now he's always in a bad mood at home, and I can't even remember the last time I saw him smile. "Why have you been so irritable since I got pregnant?" I questioned him about it, but he just snapped back.
"What? I'm fine. You're the one messing things up."
Since then, he's completely shut down any conversation on the subject. To be fair, I'm not keeping up with the housework as much as I did before the pregnancy. But no matter how bad I feel, I'm doing the bare minimum, and the man I married wouldn't have raised his voice over something so small. Have I unknowingly done something to offend him? When I ask, he only gets angrier, and I still don't know why. As a result, we're talking less and less, and when he does speak to me, it's always to complain. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and it was putting a serious strain on our marriage. The thought of bringing a child into this situation filled me with nothing but dread. I guess it showed on my face. During a visit to my husband's parents' house, my mother-in-law called me out on it.
"Amy, you've been looking down lately. What's going on?"
These days, being at home means dealing with my husband's mood swings, so I often find refuge at my in-laws when I'm off work. When I tell my husband I'm going to his parents, he doesn't complain much, making it a good escape for me. I do feel guilty, but I have no other place where I can truly relax. "It's nothing serious," I mustered a smile from my concerned mother-in-law and responded. My in-laws always welcome me into their home without a single grimace. How could I bring myself to tell them outright that their son is the reason for my troubles? I just couldn't do it. But my mother-in-law said, "We promised to help you when you announced your pregnancy, remember? You don't have to hold back." Maybe she sensed my smile was forced, because my mother-in-law held my hand and looked me in the eyes. Her gaze was earnest, letting me know she truly cared about me. Feeling the weight of her sincerity, I glanced at my father-in-law, who was watching from the side. He nodded in agreement, sharing the same concerned look as my mother-in-law. I couldn't hold back anymore in front of these two kind souls. Words began to pour out of me, venting my recent frustrations with my husband, my worries about having a child soon, and questioning if my husband would be a capable parent in his current state. My discontent with being criticized no matter what I do, and my confusion at how my husband has changed. Once I started, I couldn't stop myself from spilling everything that had been pent up inside me. Both my mother-in-law and father-in-law listened to my tearful rant without interrupting. Tears flowed even more as I felt their kindness, and by the time I finished speaking, my face was drenched. I was a mess. After listening to my whole story, my mother-in-law said softly, "You've had it tough," and hugged me tightly. My father-in-law also placed his hand on my back, patting me gently. Finally, calming down in my mother-in-law's arms, she said, "We'll talk to Kevin. Just give us a moment." She picked up the phone and immediately called my husband. About an hour later, my husband arrived, clearly annoyed and clueless as to why he was summoned. My mother-in-law confronted him. "We've heard from Amy. What on earth are you doing?" After briefly explaining the situation, she gave him a piece of her mind. My father-in-law chimed in, pointing out that his current behavior was unacceptable, both as a husband and as a future father. At first, my husband resisted their criticisms, but as the conversation continued, he seemed to reflect on his actions.
I'm sorry. I've been lost since we found out we were having a child. I didn't know what to do.
He finally apologized to me. If my parents-in-law are genuinely sorry, they should prove it through their actions. My husband assured me. He also promised to take better care of me and the kids from now on. To be honest, I was skeptical about the impact of mere words. However, my husband's demeanor softened noticeably after this incident. Not only that, but he even started taking the initiative to help with household chores. It might be small tasks like taking out the trash and washing dishes, but it's a huge relief nonetheless. The tension that used to fill our home disappeared, and finally I felt at ease. I'm truly grateful to my parents-in-law for helping us get back on track. One day when things were going well between us, I woke up feeling a bit tired from work the day before. Even the thought of making breakfast for both of us felt like a drag. Seeing my state, my husband said,
You had a tough day yesterday, right? You seem tired. I'll make breakfast.
I was surprised by his offer. He's never been one to cook, not during our marriage or even when we were dating. Really? That would be great, but are you sure? Although his attitude had improved since the incident with my parents-in-law, I didn't expect him to cook. My husband reassured me,
It's no big deal,
and started preparing breakfast in the kitchen. A little while later, what he brought to the table was some slightly burnt scrambled eggs and toast, and a salad with noticeably uneven cut vegetables.
Sorry, they're a bit burnt.
I returned a smile to my husband, who was slightly embarrassed about his cooking. Sure, the meal doesn't look particularly appetizing, but the fact that my husband took the effort to make it makes me happy. I really don't care about the appearance. We both quickly dig into our breakfast. While appreciating my husband's efforts, we eat quickly as we're pressed for time before work. Then, as I take a bite of the scrambled eggs he made, something feels off. It's a weird taste, unlike the ketchup or the eggs. I thought it might be a burnt part at first, but it's a flavor I've never experienced before. Is there something different about these scrambled eggs? They taste a bit off. I feel bad for questioning the dish he worked on, but I can't help but ask. My husband says,
No, I just cooked them. Is something wrong?
In his usual tone. After watching my husband leave for work, I thought maybe I was mistaken about the taste of the eggs. I was about to eat quickly and leave myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with the taste. Feeling guilty toward my husband, I decided to leave the scrambled eggs in the fridge and head to work. I thought I would try eating them again when I got home. If they still tasted strange, I'd let my husband know. With that in mind, I arrived at work and began my usual tasks. However, just a few hours into the workday, I started feeling sick. Could it be my usual morning sickness? I thought. I headed to the restroom a few times, but something felt different. Uncontrollable vomiting and diarrhea set in, clearly worse than any morning sickness I'd had before. When I got up from my desk to speak to my boss, that's when it happened. I collapsed. I faintly hear my coworkers calling my name, but I lose consciousness. How much time has passed? I wake up in a hospital bed. A doctor comes over as soon as my parents-in-law are at the bedside and notices I'm awake. He lightly explains the situation and conducts some tests. Then he asks,
What did you eat today?
I tell the doctor that I ate the breakfast my husband made. I hadn't eaten anything else, so there's no mistake. The doctor turns pale and says,
Listen carefully. Our tests found a substance in your body that's not normally found in food.
According to the doctor, it's a chemical found in herbicides. Even in small amounts, it can cause food poisoning, vomiting, and diarrhea. And it's in my body.
Are you sure you didn't eat anything other than the breakfast your husband made? Any other possibilities?
That's when I understood why the doctor had looked so pale. If I hadn't eaten anything else, it would mean my husband had intentionally poisoned our food with herbicide. The doctor must be considering other possibilities too. However, something clicked in my mind. The off taste I felt in the scrambled eggs this morning, it must have been the taste of herbicide.
The good news is it was a small amount this time, so the harm was minimal. It could have been dangerous for both you and the baby, though.
The doctor added this quietly, realizing that I had no other suspects apart from my husband's breakfast. It meant that I could have unknowingly lost my child. Even my parents-in-law, who had been listening to the conversation, sensed the gravity of the situation and couldn't say a word. I checked my husband's whereabouts. It seemed he already knew I was in the hospital and was on his way. At that moment, I shared a plan with my parents-in-law and the doctor and got their cooperation. Because I still needed to rest, I couldn't leave the hospital. Understanding the situation, both parents-in-law and the doctor agreed to cooperate. In less than an hour, my husband arrived.
I was shocked to hear you were in the hospital, Amy. Are you okay?
He looked relieved as he said this. However, I already knew he was the reason I was here. It only infuriated me more. So I confronted him directly. Did you put herbicide in my breakfast? The tests found it. You realize this is your fault, right? My husband looked shaken at my words. However, he tried to maintain his composure.
What are you talking about? Why would I do such a thing, especially to my pregnant wife?
His expression was so suspicious that it was more than enough for me to be convinced. However, it was still my subjective perspective, not objective evidence. But when I glared at him, he retorted,
What's your proof? You have none, right? Stop talking nonsense.
My husband seemed upset as he said that.
You suspect me without any evidence?
He looked at me as if to say just that. To him, I finally spoke up. I didn't eat all of the breakfast this morning. The rest is still in our fridge. All we have to do is test it. He must not have seen it coming. Up until a moment ago, despite his unease, my husband had a certain smugness on his face. That expression clearly shifted. His face turned pale and he started to sweat profusely. After a moment of thought, he hurriedly said,
I don't need to visit anymore, okay? I just remembered I left something at work. I'm going home now.
He seemed ready to exit the hospital room. He's probably planning to go home and dispose of the leftover breakfast, but I've already taken steps to prevent that. I had Emily submit the leftover breakfast to the police. They've been notified too.
Huh, reported, he mumbled, looking stunned.
Just then, the sound of police sirens echoed from outside the hospital. Looks like your ride's here. I'm sure they'll want to hear all about it. Off you go. I watched as the arriving officers took my husband away. Later, he was arrested after weed killer was found in the food he'd left at our home. According to his statement, he'd been having an affair and was planning to divorce me soon. But then my pregnancy came to light, and even his parents were thrilled. That changed the atmosphere, making it difficult to talk about divorce. So he thought if anything happened to our unborn child, he could blame it on me and get the divorce. Hearing this, both his parents and I were furious. I went to where he was detained and severed our familial ties. We divorced and I claimed compensation. It'll be a long time before he's released, but we've also gotten a restraining order against him for me and the child. A few months after my husband was arrested, I safely gave birth to a baby girl. I'm now raising her at my parents' home and regularly meeting with my in-laws. Every day, I'm thankful for the miracle that is my daughter's life.